literally the lowest despicable individual that you could ever encounter in your life. I think it was a heinous crime.
Pompous ass.
I think everybody was astonished.
I think he's inhuman.
I think he was an immoral person.
I think he's guilty.
Idiot.
I guess everybody thought that it just wouldn't happen.
When he knows he manipulated all of these folks.
I think he ended up screwing up his family life.
I think he was guilty.
Scumbag would be a good one.
I don't know how a human being could do that to his wife, to his children, to his family.
I think he's a person with no morals.
Bastard.
And I think he should be executed, absolutely. Not only should he fry, but she should too.
On the evening of September 7th, 1984, Maria Marshall, a devoted wife and mother of 3, was brutally murdered. Convicted of conspiracy to commit murder, her husband, Robert Marshall, spent the past 18 years on death row in New Jersey State Prison in Trenton, New Jersey. During those 18 years, Marshall declined all requests for on-camera interviews until now. With the final appeal to spare his life on the horizon, Robert Marshall consented to a taped interview, which was conducted in the confines of a locked cage within the Trenton State Prison.
That night, it was almost an unscheduled visit to Atlantic City.
And I kissed my mother goodbye, and I told her I loved her, and I thought the next time I'd see her would be tomorrow morning when she woke me up for school.
Marshall was at a night with his wife in Atlantic City gambling and having dinner, and when he came back from Atlantic City, depending on what story he told, he either had problems immediately going through the rest stop or the toll booth going north, or he had some problems right from the start.
So I left the toll plaza and I increased my speed to about 70, and I felt a wobble in one of the tires. It felt like it was coming from the rear.
Said to his wife, "I've got to pull off and change the tires." She said, "For heaven's sakes, whatever you do, don't pull the side of the road," because a friend of theirs had been killed about a year before doing exactly that.
So the only safe place I could find was this picnic area that came up.
In any event, he allegedly pulled in this dark area to check the tire.
Didn't want to stop on the ramp because if I had to change the tire, I'd be in an incline. So I made a turn into the picnic area and stopped a few feet from the throughway.
Got out of the car, was bent over the tire that was nearly flat. Somebody hit him on the head.
The instant before I was struck, I heard her cry out, "Oh my God."
He woke up, his wife was dead.
I woke up in a pool of blood. I found her lying across the front seat.
He had an injury. I pointed out that I think it was 7 stitches to close the injury.
I tried to get her to respond to my voice. She didn't move.
He finally flagged down a car, they called the police, and they came to the scene.
Mrs. Marshall was slumped in the passenger's vehicle. There obviously were 2 large caliber bullet holes in her back, both of which could have been covered by a 50-cent piece, so they were very close together.
I woke up John, brought the 2 of them into Robbie's room, and I sat there and I told him what happened.
From the time my father came into my room and woke me up at wee hours in the morning and picked me up, carried me down to my brother's room where he was awake, my brother, and was crying, and there was a priest there, and he told us what happened.
The police showed up and began to question him.
And he certainly knew that right up the Garden State Parkway from where he pulled into this secluded area was a full-service gas station where he could have had any ailment that his car had attended to very easily.
I didn't know how far down the road the Roy Rogers was. I just wanted to check the tire at the first place where I could safely stop.
You know, how many people out there that hear about that actually took the time to go and check out the picnic area? It's, you know, maybe 100 or 200 feet, the actual picnic area, off the shoulder of the road. It's not a desolate spot.
At about 2 o'clock, if you looked at it, 12 being the top of the tire, at about 2 o'clock in the sidewall, there was a slit in the tire consistent with being made by a knife or a dagger of some type. It was not something that would be associated with running over something, and it would be on the treaded part of the tire. The story didn't make much sense at that time, but we didn't know whether he was just in shock or maybe the blow on the head might make him have the inability to articulate correctly what the story was.
Right there on the spot, they asked him the question, do you have a girlfriend? And he made a mistake. He made a fatal mistake. He lied. He said no. Well, it didn't take the police very long to discover that not only did he have a girlfriend, he had a mistress. He was prepared to divorce his wife and live with his mistress. And I think that if anything, when you tell one lie to the police, they're suspicious of anything else that you might say.
News of Maria Marshall's murder shook the Toms River community, the place the Marshalls had called home for over 20 years. Suddenly, this quiet, beachfront community was immersed in an intricate tale of murder for hire, a salacious love affair, gambling debts, and the model American family gone awry.
Maria and Rob had been sweethearts since they were teenagers, and were married when they were both very young, 20 and 21, I think.
He was a man who really had the world in his hands. He was making money, had a beautiful wife, 3 great sons.
I had 2 loving parents. My brothers and I got along great. You know, we went on vacations, did stuff together. Both my parents were very active in charities, charitable events.
I know he was involved with the United Way here in Ocean County, raised a lot of money for him.
He was a successful insurance man, member of the country club.
Rob was a lieutenant in the Navy. He was a fighter pilot and then became a rescue helicopter pilot.
He was not verbally abusive or physically abusive in any way. He was very loving towards all of us, and had a very close and loving relationship with my mother. It was a really loving environment.
This was not the kind of person that you would have thought about if you had been reading the details of the trial in the local newspaper.
I don't think many people were aware of the affair that he was having at the time, but they certainly became aware of that shortly after his wife's murder.
Well, Saran Krasauer was his girlfriend. She was married, and so was he. They knew each other from socially from the yacht club.
I had known her for 10 or 15 years before we decided to have this relationship, and that all happened sort of by accident.
We received a call from a local attorney here who indicated that he was hired by Maria Marshall, and in turn he hired a private investigator because she suspected her husband of having an extramarital affair.
We were at a party, and I said, kind of half joking, are we ever going to get together? It started out as just a tryst, and by the 3rd time we were together, it was so emotionally supercharged that, in her words, every time we met we were at a different plateau.
He would meet her on various occasions in the afternoon and whenever he could. And I think it was their common desire to leave their respective spouses and go off into the sunset as man and wife.
Pretty soon we were talking about leaving our spouses and living together. And there's no doubt in my mind that we both fell in love with each other.
The nature of the crime provided the media with front-page material, seemingly taken from a Hollywood script.
I guess reporters were going to the prosecutor's office and the police and asking him questions, and they were slipping him tidbits of information. And headlines started popping up.
The investigation, I think, focused on him immediately, although he was treated, I think, in the press as sort of a victim at first.
The Marshall case was the most notorious case that I've been involved with in my 30 years here.
I think notoriety-wise, it was the biggest case. It was a public interest case, if you will. The newspapers got into it, and it's the type of a case that sells newspapers.
You know, we're a small daily newspaper serving what then was a community probably of 50 or 60,000 people, and it was something that people wanted to know more and more and more about.
Hearing and seeing the negative press, and I understand now why they were doing that. Basically, bad news sells papers. Good news is for the back page.
You had everything. You had deceit.
He had an adulterous husband.
You had a beautiful young woman being murdered. You had three marvelous young men who had been deceived by their father.
A gambler, a man who was in debt.
You had violence. You had this mysterious Louisiana connection. It was great material for a newspaper.
And a man accused of hiring someone to kill his wife. I mean, it's a beautiful book plot.
An overwhelming interest in the case from various news organizations and popular culture began to take shape. Blind Faith, a book by author Joe McGinnis, chronicled the murder and the trial that ensued. A television miniseries starring Robert Urich and Joanna Kearns was also produced. Both the book and the miniseries pandered to the public, focusing on the sensational aspects of the murder and the life of Robert Marshall.
This trial was notorious in that our book was written about it, made-for-television miniseries was written about it.
Joe McGinnis sat down with me and my family and told us how the book was going to go, and how it was going to be shine a positive light on my father. And then when the book came out, it was the exact opposite.
I would describe it as a docu-novel. I mean, he took facts and then made up conversations that allegedly were had by myself and others. Certainly, he talked about conversations that he attributed to me that I know I didn't have.
Blind Faith, I don't think, took any great literary stretches from the basic plot. It didn't need much embroidery. It was a great story, well told by McGinnis.
When the book came out, I was deeply disturbed by what the author was saying about not just Rob Marshall, but the town, the people in it.
The author took certain liberties, obviously. He had to make the book a little more interesting.
I believe he came to town with a plot in mind, and he wrote the plot without ever bothering to look at the circumstance. He talked, for example, about the mansions on Brookside Drive. Well, there are no mansions on Brookside Drive. And if I drove you up and down the street, you'd see some very lovely homes, but nothing that by any standards could be called a mansion.
He more or less made it appear that all these people in the country club felt that they were better than the average working Joe, which is not true.
The truth of it is that about the time that all this was going on, the country club was trying desperately to get new members. They were offering very low rates for social membership and for golf membership.
In the book, the trial was accurately depicted. The author sat in the courtroom and took notes.
The sentiments of an entire community stemmed primarily from information obtained through the news media and Blind Faith. Perhaps the community became so engrossed in a lascivious affair and heinous murder that they failed to maintain an objective outlook.
When I went around the community, particularly some of the community leaders, and said, gee, this guy has written a terrible book about our town, don't you think we should say something and defend it? No one was willing to come forth and defend the town for fear it would be construed that they were defending Rob Marshall.
They have read the book, seen the movie, or have heard about that in the headlines of the newspapers, or they may have been at the trial or heard about that through rumors, and just think, how could he do that? But I mean, they're not hearing the whole story. To have people start to talk and spread rumors, was incredibly stressful, and it was just very hard to deal with.
As Robert Marshall's world unraveled before his eyes, the state of New Jersey uncovered additional information through investigation that further tarnished his reputation and stripped away his dignity.
We also did an Equifax check, which is something you would check to see about insurance policies.
Don't misunderstand me. There was insurance on both Maria and I. I did an estate analysis late in 1983 that determined that Maria and I needed additional insurance on our lives to satisfy the needs of the estate plan. I needed $1 million on my life, and she needed $1 million on hers.
And we found out that months, weeks, and indeed hours before his wife was killed, Marshall was taking out insurance policies on his wife.
The insurance is devastating. The insurance was devastating.
Later on, I received a solicitation in the mail for a very inexpensive mortgage insurance policy, which I sent the card back to the guy, and by the time it went through the mill, that was the policy that was applied for on September 6th, the day of her death.
He took out a lot of insurance in his wife's name, but he took out a lot of insurance in his own name, too, for his wife.
The only reason that I took it out at that time was insurance companies work on a nearest age basis. Maria her birthday was March 13th. On September 13th, she would have been a year older for insurance purposes. And the cost of the coverage we were buying on September 6th would have gone up a notch because she would have been a year older.
To do that and knowing how that could come back to haunt him if you were planning to have her killed that very day, is just incredible to me.
He had life insurance on his own life that he let lapse because he couldn't pay the premiums, but yet he continued to pay hers. That doesn't make sense.
When the bills came, they came quarterly, and I would pay mine or Maria's early, and then I would use the 30-day grace period to stagger the payment and pay the second premium a month later. I'd also like to point out that I could have added accidental death coverage to that $1 million of insurance that I had on Maria and May. And I didn't. It would have been for pennies more. If I was planning to kill Maria or have her killed, that would have been a logical thing to do. But that wasn't the case. The insurance was purchased for sound estate planning reasons.
If she died, there would be $1.2 million life insurance, and guess who was going to get that money? He was.
Marshall claims that he wanted to hire a private detective, but he didn't want a local one. Well, that was probably another fatal mistake.
Well, in May of 1984, Maria and I went to our neighbor's daughter's birthday party in Point Pleasant. And sitting at the bar was a fellow I had never met before. I was just introduced to him by my neighbor, a fellow by the name of Bobby Cumber.
He had met that man at a party in Toms River, told him he was looking for a private detective. The man says, call me in Louisiana and I'll give you the man's name.
I wanted to find somebody out of town, somebody that would work cheaply. He said he knew somebody. To give him a call when he got home.
He wanted the detective to find out if his wife knew that he had a mistress and he was planning to divorce her.
We also, as a matter of course, get telephone records, and we obtain telephone records not only from his office, but from his telephone. Those telephone records led to other telephone records from Atlantic City, from Shreveport, Louisiana.
Certainly the series of telephone calls that were made to his home and to his office from Louisiana. I think I showed the jury at least 35 phone calls that were made for a 2 or 3 month period prior to her death.
Actually, I spoke to him at his home. He asked me to call him the next day at his business, and he would try to have the investigator there. When I called him the next day, he wasn't there. He asked me to call him back. And that's one of the reasons there ended up being 29 phone calls to Louisiana, all from my business phone. It would have been easy to hide those calls so they wouldn't no one would have ever known I made a call to Louisiana. But I had nothing to hide.
Initially, we were concerned with the .45 caliber pistol because the autopsy showed that that's what caused her death, 2 shots with a .45 caliber pistol. When there were phone conversations between Marshall's office and a hardware store in Bossier City, Louisiana, we thought maybe he might have purchased or had somebody purchase a weapon for him at this store. When
I spoke to McKinnon for the first time, he told me that he was a former deputy sheriff, and he had established his own private investigation business, and that he would come up if I sent him $2,500, which seemed like a reasonable amount of money for him to come up and do the work that we needed to get done. And so I sent him a check, a money order, in my name from the Western Union in Toms River. I didn't try to hide that either.
So he gets involved with this, quote, private detective who was really a defrocked deputy sheriff from Louisiana.
Billy Wayne McKinnon is described when I went down to Louisiana as a very dangerous man.
The conduit to Marshall was Robert Cumber, who worked at the hardware store that Billy Wayne would frequent. And during the course of him coming into the store, Cumber knew that he was a former police officer and said, "Do you do private investigations? Because this man in New Jersey that I met wants to do an investigation on his wife, allegedly."
He said that there was winnings from the casinos that he had been turning over to his wife that he couldn't find. It wasn't in the bank. He didn't know where it was. He wanted to know what she had done with the money.
Initially for the purpose of bringing him back to New Jersey to use him as our witness. We had no reason to believe that Cumber was involved in the actual murder, but might have had something to do with the planning of this murder.
And then when I suspected that she was possibly talking to an attorney, or maybe had her own investigator, I felt it was important to try to determine whether or not she had hired somebody.
I think a couple weeks later, eventually got enough information to arrest Billy Wayne McKinnon. I knew we wanted to use and needed to have somebody who was in the inner circle of these people to describe what happened.
You know, they gave him pretty much everything. So he had a great incentive to lie. When a crime is committed with a gun in New Jersey, there's supposed to be a 5-year minimum sentence. They waived that. So he ended up with 14 months. And then he was released. Now here's a guy that probably was the shooter himself. And he ended up walking.
The deal they cut with him was obscene. In these cases, the government, they say they have to do business with the devil in order to get the bigger devil.
Well, my lawyers described it as a pact with the devil. And that's probably not too far from the truth.
The investigation was handled in a manner that no matter what it took to win, they were going to do it. If they had to withhold evidence, they would have done it. If they had to manipulate witnesses, they would have done it. No matter what it took to win, they wanted Rob Marshall. He was their token.
You know, we're going to give you immunity in return for giving a statement against Robert Marshall, but, you know, if you're the trigger man, we can't do that. We can't give you immunity. He sat down and made up this story.
Billy Wayne indicated that on 2 occasions prior to the murder, he came up at Marshall's request to actually kill his wife.
There was never any intention on my part for McKinnon to do anything to Maria. Now, he testified that he went to the Ram's Head on his first visit to kill Maria, and he found out, and he discovered that it was too well lit. That was his testimony. My investigator turned to me during the trial and he said, what was he going to do, ask the cab driver to wait while he killed Maria? He had no car up here. He took a cab to the Ram's Head. So that's how ridiculous the whole thing was.
And checking the casino records, we found out that in every occasion that he met Billy Wayne and gave him an amount of money, within a half hour prior to meeting McKinnon, he would get an advance from the casino for the exact amount that Billy Wayne said he paid him. He thought that Marshall had an unlimited supply of money, and he knew he was a desperate man. He wanted to have this wife taken care of because he wanted to get along with his life without her.
I believe in my heart that McKinnon saw Rob Marshall as dollar signs and was going to exploit him as much as that he could.
He was quoted as saying that he was out to get as much out of Marshall as he can.
I think his intent was to take money for killing his wife because is Marshall going to complain? Is he going to go to the police and say, Jesus, this guy's taking money from me to kill my wife, and he doesn't do it?
They would make a deal with him only if he wasn't the shooter. That was the one piece of evidence that that McKinnon didn't have available before the trial, because they gave him the entire discovery file before he made his statement. So he was able to piece it together and come up with a scenario that was acceptable by the police. So he had to name Larry Thompson, or had to name somebody, and that's how Larry Thompson was involved in the case. He was apparently had a bad reputation down in Louisiana, and so I guess McKinnon felt he would be a likely candidate.
The state would not have given him that plea bargain if they believed that he was the shooter. Hence, since he couldn't get the plea bargain and be the shooter, and he was the shooter, I submit, he invented my client, Larry Thompson.
Billy Wayne McKinnon turned the investigation upside down, naming Larry Thompson as the shooter of Maria Marshall. With McKinnon and Robert Cumber already incarcerated, the state focused on Larry Thompson to complete the Louisiana connection.
And Thompson then called Billy Wayne and says, we can do this, this can happen. You know, I know that insurance policies do pay off for things like this. So now Billy Wayne was in over his head. The scam that he was doing to get money from Marshall with no intent of killing his wife now became something that was serious, because he allegedly knew that Thompson would do something like this.
When Maria finally convinced me to leave, we were ahead $6,000. And I walked away from the tables with a big chip tray full of chips. And we think that what happened was that McKinnon saw me walk away from the table with all that money. And as he testified at the trial, he was out to take me for whatever he could. So we believe that he set up the car by letting air out of the tire and then followed us home.
There was a motion made by his attorney to have the case moved because of pretrial publicity. By that, you could eliminate any grounds for appeal in that regard.
They asked for a change of venue, which was a good idea, it seemed like, except they moved it to Atlantic County. Well, Atlantic County had a stake in this issue too, because after all, this murder began, if you will, at an Atlantic City casino. Casinos were relatively new. They didn't need publicity saying that there were bad things happening at the casinos.
The trial was held in Mays Landing, and the trial lasted, I think, about six weeks.
And there were standing room only every day. They had television cameras there from Japan.
Representing the state of New Jersey was Kevin Kelly, a young, underrated attorney who was fortunate to have the opportunity to try such a notorious case.
I felt that there was more than sufficient evidence that I could present against Marshall to convince a jury beyond a reasonable doubt.
To look, I look at him and say, he got a chance against this guy. They're going to eat him alive. Kevin Kelly didn't come off as a real high-class lawyer. He looked like a prosecutor. What I say mean by a prosecutor, he was kind of not laid back, but he was kind of quiet. And I wouldn't want him to be my lawyer.
I think the prosecutor was overzealous, to say the least.
Kevin Kelly, the way he handled himself during the trial, I definitely think it falls under the phrase prosecutorial misconduct.
The facts of the case were so heinous. I mean, the guy had his wife murdered, and he destroyed not only her life but his family. So it certainly was a heinous crime that was committed. So if not consciously, subconsciously, you always want to make sure in a case like that that justice is done.
So Kelly asks me at the trial why her ashes were in a desk drawer at the funeral home. He knew damn well that the ashes were not in a desk drawer, but he needed to sensationalize the issue, and he was successful.
Oh, well, wow. He didn't send the ashes back. You know, the ashes are still sitting in, I believe he said it was sitting in a drawer. And that was just overwhelming. For me, it was an overwhelming kind of thing.
At Christmas time, we had plans for us all to go down and spread my mother's ashes at Captiva Island, Florida. And my father was arrested a week before Christmas and was not released on bail, and his hopes were to be vindicated by the end of the trial. And we would all go together then and bury my mother's ashes, which is why during the trial my mother's ashes were still kept at the funeral home, and a proper burial had never taken place.
And back in the jury room, a lot of people were talking about it.
When Larry and I came into that courtroom, Kelly would say, "Good morning, Larry. Good morning, Wanda," who was Larry's wife, sitting right behind him. And I thought to myself, this is kind of strange for a prosecutor to be greeting a defendant. I don't know what was up. You know, I don't know why he was so focused on me. Obviously he felt he wanted to get me.
We were sitting there. There were a lot of little things happening, like Robert Marshall was always making, faces over to us. On the bottom, he had a folder he'd always had with him. He would be sitting at the table while there were people being talked to. And he would hold the folder up like this, and I believe, I'm not 100% sure, but I believe it said "I love you" on it, which he might have done for his sons, I don't know, but he kept flashing it to us. You know, he made sure we've seen it several times, and it was really cheesy.
In this case, I think Marshall was trying to get over on the jury by wearing a wedding band. His wife was been dead, I think, at that time, maybe a year and a half. He was still wearing his wedding band. I knew what he was trying to do in terms of trying to make some points with the jury, so I saw that as an opportunity to take it away from him and maybe make points in terms of my case.
That's another typical example of the type of thing he did. I had to forfeit my wedding band when I was arrested, and it was given back to me right before the trial. So he made it seem as though that I put it on for show. It's not true. I haven't taken it off since then. I wear it to this day, and I haven't taken it off since I got it back.
Was I aggressive? Yes. Do I aggressively cross-examine in the appropriate case? Yes. Do I do it most of the time? If it's the appropriate case, I will.
The prosecution painted the picture of a desperate man who wanted to remarry and needed more money.
I think he was brash. I think he was distasteful. During the discussion of the autopsy photos of the autopsy, he displayed the photos on the table next to him, face up, so that my family, who was sitting right behind that table, would have to see them. And when I say my family, I mean my boys.
Saran Krasauer's role in this trial, certainly she was an important witness. I was able to prove to the jury one aspect of motive, which was not only did he want to get rid of his wife, but he had someone waiting in the wings to go to afterwards, in addition to life insurance and the other issues that came up. So she did play a very important part in the case.
There were some conversations which he testified to at the time of trial that during the course of him complaining about his wife to her, he would say, believe me, if I knew how to do it, I'd hire somebody to get rid of her. It didn't mean that much to her until such time as she died. And then it became important for her to come forward and tell the police this, which she did.
Now, this is only a rumor at this point, but we'd heard that she was cooperating with the prosecutor because they were holding a drug charge over her husband's head. And that was one of the reasons that she was being so cooperative.
Following her meeting with police, Saran Krasauer agreed to testify against Robert Marshall, only after signing an immunity agreement ensuring that she would not be implicated in the death of Maria Marshall. However, news of her scheduled testimony was never presented to the defense, and the letter of immunity never found its way into the hands of the defense's discovery file.
Or a copy of that letter should have been put in a general file. It was not. So when it came time for discovery, that never went out to Marshall's defense attorney. So when she took the stand, he could say, can you tell a jury about this letter you got. It's a lot in the letter of immunity. To have immunity, you know, many things have to take place, none of which was evident here.
We have it in writing from the Ocean County prosecutor that she was given immunity during the trial or before the trial. It was signed by the Ocean County prosecutor, but they didn't bother to give it to us. They put it in a separate file, and we didn't find out about it until a reporter from the New York Times read Blind Faith called a reporter from the Asbury Park Press and found out from him that yes, she had been given immunity. Somebody in here sent me a transcript from a habeas hearing in Essex County where a prosecutor was shown to have withheld evidence from the defense that eventually overturned his conviction. That prosecutor was Kevin Kelly. He's been doing this stuff for years. They accidentally misfiled the papers. They said they put it in a different file, and people forgot about it. We found that a little ridiculous that they unintentionally misfiled it. I think it was done purposely, along with so many other pieces of discovery that were misfiled and that we never received. Of course, Glenn never objected.
Representing Robert Marshall was Glenn Zeitz, one of Philadelphia's most prominent attorneys and best known for representing members of the Philadelphia Mafia.
He had a very positive attitude, snappy dresser. First time I seen him, he looked like a real high-class, very expensive lawyer. He's something you would expect to see him on TV. He had that look, like, wow, this guy's my lawyer. If I need a lawyer, this is the guy you want to call. I mean, you know, he's like, no way this guy can lose.
Glenn Zeitz dropped the ball. He didn't do what has to be done.
You know, he was convincing, but I thought the other guy was a little more better.
I just think he did a terrible job, and this was an individual who was a high price, supposed to be a top-notch trial attorney, and he clearly was not.
Mr. Zeitz did not do for his client what he ought to have done.
I think it was close to $250,000 that he paid for his defense. But the attorney who defended him, it seemed like he just shrugged his shoulders.
He probably, I'm sure at some point, looked at his watch and wondered if he was going to make his tee-off time.
There were other instances in the trial when I thought that he was not doing the very best for his client that he ought to be doing. One notable example was when he had gone all the trouble to get an order from the court to examine a tire from the automobile that was driven the night of the death. And when he was presenting his defense, I turned to him at one point and said, when's your expert coming in about the tire? And he said, oh, I don't think I'm going to bother to use him. I don't think it's that important. Well, when you're dealing with a man's life, I think that you do everything, even things that you may not think are important.
The tire, to me, was a big deal. His story with the tire, how he fell flat and pulled in the thing, you know, pulled in the area. That seemed kind of fishy. So that's one of the first things I wanted to see when we went into the jury room. I wanted to see the tire.
Billy Wayne McKinnon testified that Marshall paid him X amount of dollars on a certain date. Well, I had corroborating evidence to show that money was withdrawn from Marshall's account by him in Atlantic City, that same amount of money, on that same date. So that corroborated Billy Wayne McKinnon. And I had instances, probably 30 instances like that.
McKinnon said that he and I met on the Garden State Parkway and picked out a place to kill Maria together. Well, we were able to prove that I was at home at the time McKinnon said that we were on the Parkway.
But McKinnon to me was a shady type of character. You know, he came over as a shady character. Do I believe all of his testimony? No. I do believe some of it was true. I couldn't remember now what it was, but there was some stuff to him had a little truth to it. And it was too well orchestrated. You know, everything was kind of fitting right in the spot, like a nice puzzle.
So it's a crazy set of circumstances, but all the pieces fell into place. The only thing that didn't fall into place was the kind of legal defense that Marshall received in the courtroom.
I believe he brought his son on to testify at one point. I remember that really kind of upset me a little bit. I don't think he should have done that.
They really didn't have anybody else that was a witness for them that could, blow this thing wide open for them. And it was just Billy Wayne McKinnon and circumstantial evidence.
Circumstantial evidence is, to me, the best type of evidence because it can't be cross-examined. An eyewitness can make mistakes, can be cross-examined, what lighting conditions, blah, 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 your motivation for this. Circumstantial evidence in the form of bank records and tolls and everything, how do you cross-examine that?
There was no physical evidence presented in the courtroom. Everything that happened in the courtroom was circumstantial. It was the testimony of the supposed private detective that had made the arrangements for the murder. The other woman, the mistress, if you will, in the trial, were the only two people that testified against him.
The murder weapon was never found. They allegedly threw it in the Mullica River from the vehicle. And we've had divers down there and ice. We've had it in good weather. But apparently the bottom there is trees and roots.
I can remember like it was yesterday, sitting there. My uncle had his arm around me, and as the jury came in and they were going to deliberate, and they said, "We, the jury," man, I never felt my heart beat like that ever. It was just coming out of my chest, and I just couldn't believe it.
That the youngest of Rob's sons turned to the other sons and his sister and said, "We sure wish Mr. Hartman was representing our father rather than the attorney that he had at the time."
His attorney looked at the judge and said, "Whatever you do, we can live with." And the judge turned around and sentenced him to death.
An attorney doing a penalty phase of a case has to do four things, essentially. He has to investigate mitigation, and what that means is go find witnesses who will kind of humanize the client, and you've got to go find witnesses who are going to paint your client in a particular light, which is then going to convince the jury that they shouldn't execute him. At that point, once you investigate witnesses, you have to put together the case. At that point, you then have to present the case to the jury. And then at the end of it, you have to stand up as an attorney and convince the jury in a summation why they shouldn't execute your client. None of those things were done here.
The standard for lawyers in the Strickland case, which is measured by the United States Supreme Court, doesn't say you have to have an A lawyer or even a B lawyer. As long as you got somebody above a D or better, that's okay.
I think if Frank Hartman would have represented him, I think he would have been acquitted. I truly believe that.
I guess the critical factor in this whole case is the fact that the defense was so poorly done.
And when he went to argue to the jury to save his client's life, he never asked them to save his client's life. The best he did was, at one point he told them, "I don't want to stand here and go through the whole litany of things that he's done in 46 years. That's exactly what he's supposed to do, is go through the whole litany of the good things that Robert Marshall did in 46 years. Another thing he did at the end of the case, rather than at the point that he would normally say to the jury, "Here's why I want you to spare my client's life, here are the reasons," instead he said, "All I can say is this, that I hope when you individually consider the death penalty, that you're each able to reach whatever opinion you find in your own heart, and that whatever you feel is the just thing to do, we can live with it." It's not even accurate. Obviously, he can't live with a death verdict. Mr. Zeitz never asked the jury to spare his client's life.
If my lawyer had done the job he was paid to do, I could have won the trial. At the very least, I shouldn't have been sentenced to death. As I said, he called no witnesses, no experts. He got up and spoke for 10 minutes and sat down, and Kelly spoke for 15 minutes. That was it. So I blame myself first, but having then been put into the situation, I think the blame falls squarely on the shoulders of an inadequate defense.
So this fellow McKinnon is walking free in Louisiana or wherever he is now. Larry Thompson had to go through a full trial where he was innocent. Marshall's on death row. Cumber's in for life. Boy, talk about the justice system going awry. What a prime example.
As Robert Marshall remains on death row, many wonder if he will indeed be the first inmate to be executed in the state of New Jersey since 1963.
Why am I on death row? Looking at the overall thing, I have only myself to blame because of my infidelity to my wife. She would be alive, my family would be intact, I'd be at home getting ready to barbecue on the back deck or something. Well, Robbie and Chris have sort of divorced themselves from me. I don't have any communication with them at all. And I'm convinced that they adopted this attitude because of influence from McGinnis. He needed an ally. He needed somebody to help him with the book. So he got to Robbie and Chris. In fact, he visited Chris at school and did the same thing with Robbie. And what many people don't realize is that I was close to all of my boys for over a year after I got here. It was only after McGinnis got his hooks in them that the two older boys decided to part ways. And I haven't spoken to them since. Both of them came in for visits during that first year. But once they got tight with McGinnis, that all ended. McGinnis got his book, and I lost my kids.
And I think they're wrestling with the fact that the fact that they long ago made up their minds that their dad, our father, may have been involved, and maybe was guilty. I think they're wrestling with the fact that maybe they're wrong.
I still have their picture in a frame in my cell, so I think about them a lot. And I have their family pictures in the photo album that I put together up there. I wish them well and glad that they're both successful and happy with their lives and their families.
Despite the 18-year-old verdict, which still stands, glaring examples of doubt and uncertainty still remain. If one disregards the moral dilemma involved in killing Robert Marshall, they must still face the uncertainty of his guilt or innocence.
No one who likes the death penalty in New Jersey, or particularly New Jersey, would want the first executed person to be an African American. We want a white guy who's middle class, who at least was middle class years and years ago, to be the one, and that will ease the path, so it makes it much smoother, much easier. Although New Jersey courts have not found the racial bias, the Supreme Court has said there's suspicion of it, and they're going to be watching it closely. And the report indicates there's at least geographical bias, which sometimes boils down to racial bias.
I think it's that if the state Supreme Court had a case to pick where execution is justified, that this is one of them.
It's very important for the death penalty supporters that they get Marshall first.
If you're going to have the death penalty, then enforce it. But the idea that Marshall has been on death row since March 6th of 1986, and we're still talking here today about it. I mean, I've retired. Most other people here have retired. That it's ludicrous that it should go on this long.
I wish New Jersey would get off its butt and do something. I'm a firm believer in eye for an eye. I give them the juice myself. I have no problem with that.
I feel for people who say, I believe in the death penalty and, a life for a life, but, what happens if you find out later that that person was innocent?
As long as it's on the books and as long as the verdict still stands, he should face the punishment that was rendered.
The death penalty is wrong. It's wrong in Marshall's case. It's wrong in every case. Particularly wrong in Marshall's case where there is this bit of uncertainty.
If Kevin Kelly were here right now, I'd ask him how he sleeps at night. He put an innocent man behind bars, and he took my father away from me. He's a great man, and I don't think for 1 minute he would have anything to do with this.
Let's assume that he's been in jail 18 years now. 3 years from now, for whatever reason, evidence comes up and he's found not guilty. How do you give him back his 20 years of life?
If you were sitting on death row and you believed yourself to be innocent, you would continue to assert that. There's no reason for him not to continue that.
I'm innocent. This was the mother of my kids.
I could have some strong doubts about his guilt. I really could.
There's no doubt in my mind that Marshall took part in maybe not the ultimate plan, but took part in, on more than one occasion, trying to get somebody and giving that person whom he thought was going to kill his wife money to do such a thing.
If my client was found not guilty, Marshall should be found not guilty.
I would put my odds on his innocence when I examine the whole situation.
I certainly believe he was guilty.
That if I were sitting on the jury, I would have had to acquit him, because I don't think they really made the case.
It's been, 17 or 18 years, I never had a second thought about whether he was guilty, never.
It's a miscarriage of justice to give Robert Marshall the death penalty.
Like, it's like I asked the state of New Jersey, I asked the jurors, who is the trigger man? Who killed my mother?
No one says that Marshall pulled the trigger, but the person who did pull the trigger, only those two know whether or not he is guilty.
Now, I think the person who shot her was Billy Wayne McKinnon.
I believe Billy Wayne McKinnon killed my mother, or someone that he has yet to acknowledge that was with him killed my mother.
Thompson's a lucky man.
That every fact in the case that you could apply to Larry Thompson in terms of guilt, you could apply to Billy Wayne McKinnon equally well.
A person can be found not guilty, which Thompson was found not guilty. That doesn't mean he's innocent.
I think McKinnon was the shooter.
Right from the start, he said that the shooter was Larry Thompson. I believe he was the shooter because of what McKinnon told us.
If we have a problem in this country, it has to do with prior to the sentencing. It has to do with how we are trying people in this country.
I feel that sensationalism was served, but justice was not.
It's who's the better lawyer, and it's a game to win, and it's not a game to find justice.
When it comes to being a trial attorney, you're basically being the ultimate salesman. Is basically what it's all about.
I came away with it. Bad justice. Bad piece of justice.
Barring some kind of discovery of new evidence, Rob Marshall can't get back into court on the guilt phase issues.
We're still looking for some evidence that will get me back into court to overturn this conviction. And if we're successful with that, and I get a new trial and win it, I would hope that they would rethink things.
In 2002, Robert Marshall penned his retort to blind faith. Tunnel Vision revisits the Maria Marshall murder and the aftermath through the eyes of Robert Marshall.
Well, I want them to know that I'm innocent, that I did not have anything to do with the death of my wife. I just hope it calls attention to the case and to the unfairness of this trial, and to the fact that another innocent man has been not only convicted, but convicted and sentenced to death. Somehow we've got to get to the truth here.
If you come to town even today, 18 years later, you'll find the consensus is that Rob Marshall was a no-good son of a bitch. However, I didn't know that being a son of a bitch, even a no-good one, was a capital offense.
What would I ask for my last meal? What would my last statement be? I thought it was an absurd question, but then I thought about it and I wrote back and I said I would paraphrase W.C. Fields and say something like, all things being considered, I'd rather be in Philadelphia.